Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I am Bob Schlehuber.
And my name is Jamarl Thomas. Let's get ready to go against the grain. We have another amazing show for you today. Mini Super Tuesday. Mini Super Tuesday. Elections are like holidays here. Today is no different. 6 states are going to the polls to choose their champion to compete against Donald Trump. Michigan, Washington, Missouri, Idaho, North Dakota. It goes without saying that Sanders needs a big night. At the very least, he needs to exceed expectations to keep his chances alive. Here's looking at you, Michigan. In the first hour, we'll be diving into all things Mini Super Tuesday, states, polling, predictions, and expectations. As our esteemed producer aptly put it last week, Super Tuesday wasn't that super for one Bernie Sanders. It also didn't turn out super for our prognostications. Hopefully, we can turn that around today. A little later in the hour, we'll be reporting on the Warrens camp regarding or dealing with reporting from the Warrens campaign on why she is not endorsing Sanders. Our ever-vigilant producer will be manning the dump button, but let's keep it PG. Later in the show, we'll also get into a rather fascinating conversation on what's next for the left, for Sanders, and for that matter, the Democratic Party. After 2016, there were serious conversations on whether or not the Democratic Party could be reformed. You had all of these groups screaming, "We're boarding the ship, we're boarding the ship." Well, if the momentum of this particular race continues and the Democratic Party rally behind a dementia-riddled, cognitive declining septuagenarian, I can't imagine those calls for a new party getting quieter. Also, stay tuned for our weekly Politics of Art segment, where we will get into a great discussion on potentially a little Star Trek. But first, let's start here. Last night, I watched Sanders in Michigan on a Fox News town hall. Now, it goes without saying that being in hostile territory focuses the mind, and Sanders, this is the second time he's been at Fox News, and he did an amazing job the first time around, and this time was no different. He owned the house. I sat there watching him field questions, vigorous, strong. He's a vibrant, virile, hungry, thirsty man. Every retort, every answer, every question that he's given, he knocks it out of the park with basically, "We can do big things." We can do big things. Any random rational human being that watches Sanders in that particular element has to come away with thinking that this guy is really the person fighting for the working class. This is the guy who is very clear on his priorities. He knows what he stands for. He knows what he gets up in the morning to represent. And immediately, I'm befuddled. Yes, it is true that people vote for all sorts of reasons, but it's fair to say that class is not typically on the ballot. And my hope would be that if class was on the ballot, that people given a credible choice, a real, authentic option of going for somebody who is representing their class interests, that they would back that person. People were screaming for something fundamentally different when they threw themselves at Obama, and immediately flailing to Trump when this ephemeral blinding light of hope and change at the end of the tunnel ended up being a speeding bus. But certainly, if given a framework of the world using policy that is specific to their material interests, it will be weird, it will be odd if people didn't back that person, and yet, here we are. Also, it needs to be understood that this is not an issue of misconception. People think Sanders is more honest by like 20 points. They agree with him on health care, education, legalization of marijuana, cancellation of student debt. And yet, here we are on the cusp of a super or mini Super Tuesday with many of these people and many of the polling going towards Biden. I watched him being combative with the Fox News host, playing off an audience question. "My mama was in a brutal, repressive regime. How do you stop America from turning into a brutal, repressive regime?" And all at once, I saw it. It occurred to me, it dawned on me, the fatal flaw. And yeah, I'm saying this in a singular terms, but I know that the very the point of a concept existing means that there is something tangential that also exists, meaning you can't necessarily take these things as one without bringing in the other. But in this very specific point, I do think you can kind of put a circle around it. Basically, Sanders' flaw is that he is flawless. No, I don't mean that people believe this soon-to-be octogenarian is without spot or defect. Yes, he has weaknesses. Clearly, he makes mistakes. It's more so that in comparison to the typical creature that goes lurching through D.C., he seems, in comparison, an honest man. That is such a strange phenomena that a rational human being, ungoverned by corruption, giving you this honest take on this or that, it comes across as unattainable. Let's take a listen to Sanders being asked a question at the town hall about him being radical.
I reject the idea. I really do. That's one of the things that bothers me. And I hear it every day. I hear it on the media. I hear it from my opponents. Bernie is an extremist. Bernie is too radical. Okay, let's deal with it. Is raising a starvation minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, which has not been raised in 10 years, to $15 an hour, a living wage, a radical idea? No. Is making public colleges and universities tuition-free so that all of our people have the opportunity to get a higher education in a competitive global economy, is that a radical idea? No. Is doing what every other major country on earth does, guaranteeing health care to all as a right. I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. This is not a communist society up there in Montreal. They guarantee health care to all. They spend 50% of what we spend. Is passing a Medicare for all single-payer system a radical idea? No!
I watched him, and I thought, what am I missing? Or for that matter, what are other people saying that I'm not necessarily seeing? And I think that's what it is. It is so dispiriting, so dispiriting, that basically we have gotten so ossified in regards to our politics that the guy who seems honest, who makes just rational choices in regards to, yes, we can do big things. Yes, we've done big things in the past. Yes, we can do big things again. And policies that materially benefit the various people in the country come across as unobtainable. This election was winnable this year. This wasn't a situation where the person couldn't win this particular election. And seeing that Sanders, especially after Nevada, had taken the #1 poll position, the dominant position in this race, got across that it's not an issue of policy. It's not a situation where the people say we disagree with this or we disagree with that. You can look at the polling. They're very clear. And yet, they would still go to somebody that does not represent their policy interests. Meaning, Joe Biden is doing exceptionally well, despite the fact Joe Biden didn't care about policy at all this election. Basically, Joe Biden was running on going back to the norm, going back to the Obama era. And the guy that is struggling, that is pushing hard, that is doing a press blitz, that is up there speaking, he will speak for hours if you give him the opportunity to do so. That guy is struggling to get support, despite the fact that that's the guy that everybody is clear on represents their interests. It's so strange. It's as if that people believe that there needs to be a certain amount of ice in a person's veins, that a person can't be that moral, that ethical, that honest, that authentic, and exceed to the level of president. Well, no, that person can't if you're not going to vote for the person who behaves in that way. Ultimately, you would think that with a society that has had economic crashes, that has had income inequality, that has issues with health, all of these other travesties. And yes, to some degree, I put this on Sanders because his rhetoric didn't necessarily live up to what he was willing to do in order to win this particular contest. For example, he gets the opportunity to talk about Biden's cognitive malfunctions. Let's hear Sanders gently touch on this very particular point.
Let me just say this. Joe Biden is a friend of mine. I've known him for many, many years. When we do our events and our rallies, we try to we respect people in a sense, and we give really substantive, these guys will think maybe too long-winded answers, but we take people, there are real crises facing this country. When I give a speech, often it's 45 minutes or an hour, okay? Because there are a lot of challenges that the country faces, and I got to talk about them. I think Joe was somewhere in, where was he? I don't know, Michigan or someplace else the other day, and he spoke for 7 minutes. I don't know how you say anything other than, minimal discussion in 7 minutes. So all that I have always believed is that if we believe in democracy, a candidate has got to be honest with the people about what he or she believes, given the many, many challenges facing our country. And when you do that, when you're honest and you look at the hard issues, so you're going to take on the fossil fuel industry or Wall Street or the drug companies, it brings forth opposition. I know that. I get beaten up every day. That's fine. That's what I do. But all I would say is, I'm not going to criticize Joe, but to say that I think the American people in this incredibly complicated and difficult moment in our history are entitled to thoughtful answers to the crises we face.
But you are there to criticize Joe. I mean, that is literally what you are there for. I mean, basically, what we consider to be politics, or politics for the last 40, 50 years, have basically just been the shadow of the oligarchs in the country. That's the way you interact with them, the policies that these guys put forth that does not represent our interests. And yet, when given an actual opportunity to vote for somebody that does, he's looked at with suspicion. The truth of the matter is that a certain degree of ruthlessness is expected by the process and is accepted as necessary. I mean, understand, when people are looking at your leaders, they look for people to be strong, that can defend them, defend their interests and everything else. And part of that is to have a certain degree of ice water in their veins. I guess my thought is Sanders comes across as if he's just unobtainable. That despite his argument, despite the policy proposals, despite people agreeing with him, thinking he's authentic, there's something about it that comes across as he can't win, which is strange since everything else tells us that he could. Bob, am I onto something here? This puts me in mind of the conversations that you had with people, I think, in Iowa, where the woman was like, yeah, I like what he's saying. I like the Medicare for All stuff. I like this. I like that. But, yeah, I mean, we can't have nice things. And it puts you in mind of, like, it realizes the level of disservice that the Democratic Party has done over the last 40, 50 years. Yeah. Like, you had Kennedy that was standing on the platform screaming, we're going to the moon. They had no idea how to get to the moon, and yet they still had this notion that you prioritize the things that you want to accomplish. And if you're going to put these things in these kind of existential terms, oh, the world is coming to an end. Our habitable space is falling apart. People are losing their, lives because they don't necessarily have health care. Fine. Those are big issues, big existential issues. Well, then your rhetoric and your behavior kind of has to fall in line with that, meaning that if you really indeed believes that it is a big crisis, then you need to behave as such. And if I laid anything at Sanders' feet, it's that more than anything else. But there's also something to be said that the public itself looks at him, and even though they would agree with the policies, they still come away with this weird esoteric other of, I'd vote for that, but other people wouldn't. It's so strange.
I get a few different minds on it. In many ways, it doesn't really matter what you say if you're Bernie Sanders this whole time, because the media and the Democratic Party is going to say whatever they want to say about you and what you've said. And it goes, I mean, we were talking about him not doing well and speaking to black issues, but then you actually listen to a stump speech and you're like, oh, Bernie Sanders said all of these issues that pertain to the black community.
He brings it up.
Economic issues, healthcare issues, low-paid job issues, retirement issues. I mean, he hits the whole gamut of issues, and not just on social justice issues where all like the Bidens of the world go, black people. I talk to black people issues that care about prison. And it's like, oh my gosh, black people care about the whole spectrum of issues. But that all of a sudden is like speaking to the black issues. You Cory Booker, you talk about mass incarceration, you talk about T-Bone on the streets of what he taught you. Yeah. You're speaking to like black issues, and that's pandering to the black community, and it's speaking just to what basically white liberals think about black people, but nobody's actually listening to Sanders' stump speeches. Yeah. And this is kind of the thing. Like, he can say, I'm a democratic socialist. It doesn't matter if you say that, somebody's going to call you a communist. So what does it matter what you say? Because they're going to label you this or that. And so I think in a lot of ways, he has gone on the attack against Joe Biden, but the media just doesn't follow it up, or people aren't like, wait a second, Joe Biden, that is right. Yeah. What about this thing? Because he talks about the billionaire donations. He talks about the Social Security cuts. He talks about the different attacks that you're talking about. Maybe it's not in like a furious, like aggressive, voluminous kind of way, but when the media is not there to amplify your message, and they're basically going to take anything you do attack against Joe Biden as, oh, how dare you beat up on this old man who you're a year older than, kind of they'll spin it no matter what you do. So again, I hear what you're saying. I just don't know if that was the issue at the end of the day that's really held him back from doing better than where he is right now. I think the Democratic establishment got caught off guard in 2016. They were so set on Hillary Clinton. They thought they had the easy win. And this guy out of nowhere captured a populist moment. They've had 4 years to prepare and defend for it. They come up with Joe Biden. It's crazy to think they had 4 years and they're like, you know what? Yeah, Joe Biden.
That's our solution.
That's our solution. It shows how empty of a party this party is if Joe Biden at the end of the day is your best statesman to roll out there. And the unattainable thing, I think that's kind of an issue. That for me is a really interesting thing. You said unattainable, that there's something about Sanders that's a little kind of, I don't know if it's standoffish or some kind of distance that sits there, because he said, I'm not the guy that's going to call to wish you happy birthday just to hear nice kind of things.
I'm here to do a job.
And that's like half of politics.
Yeah.
And that's where like he does kind of feel like he's a Vermont senator talking about this thing I'm not sure about. Sure, it's going to be great for you, but it seems like kind of an arm's length, grumpy old man kind of feel to it at times. And so I don't know if attacking would have been better. It would have been almost being more vulnerable and then have that spotlight on your vulnerability, if that makes sense. Because he's very humble. He's doing the right thing behind the scenes. And in a way, you have to do maybe not necessarily the right thing, but you have to take that from behind the scenes and come out more and show people. Yeah. And that's not his style. And so there's some other stylistic things I would have changed about Bernie Sanders before maybe necessarily go on the attack more, though. I hear what you're saying.
Well, the going on attack thing, I need to put it in context. I mean, for him, and not only being, you call out lies. Mm-hmm. That's all. Yeah, it's not, like the last thing you want.
But nobody cares about these lies. I mean, Joe Biden's lies have all been, they've been discussed going back to 1988 when he ran for president. I mean, like, it's over and over again, and somehow it just, like, it doesn't matter if you lie.
It's like it's almost like there's such a short memory within regards to our political space. And you're right. When media has it in for one particular candidate but likes another candidate, for the most part, they give, Joe Biden was the default. He didn't have to do anything else. He had that low bar of just, he says something cohesive or coherent in one speech, and they're like, oh, wow, Joe Biden did amazingly well. I mean, he spoke for 6 minutes and only messed up 10 times. Like, it's that type of stuff. So I agree with you on that, but there is something to be said about being aggressive and showing wheat from chaff, especially if your argument is these are existential crises that needs to be done. And it's like, it's a crisis, but I don't want to go after my opponent. And it's like, what? There's a tonal shift, or there's a tonal difference in regards to what he's saying versus what he's willing to do in order to win. That's all.
Well, as you alluded, Jamarl, it is a Tuesday, and people are at the voting polls in 6 states, I believe, including Michigan. We're going to hear directly from Julie Hurwitz, who is in Michigan after this break. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik. Tune in every Monday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for our regular segment, Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers, where we take a look at the state of education across the country. What's happening in our schools, colleges, and universities, and what impact does it have on the world around us? Our resident expert is Bill Ayers, the legendary activist, educator, and author. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Monday and every Monday for Education for Liberation with Bill Ayers.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. I'm Bob Schley. We're here with Jamarl Thomas, and we're talking about the votes today across the country in 6 states. As I mentioned, it's not quite Super Tuesday, but it's pretty important. And among the most important states at play is Michigan. Bernie Sanders actually won Michigan in 2016 in an upset, as polls before the vote showed him trailing Hillary Clinton by more than 20 points. This is the same place where Sanders finds himself today, heading into voting in Michigan, 20 points behind Joe Biden, according to the latest polls, by 538. Biden, at least in these polls, seemed to be propelled by the establishment machine over the last week and a half here. But maybe these polls are off again. Let's hear directly from somebody in Michigan. That is the Detroit civil rights attorney, Julie Hurwitz, a partner in the firm Goodman, Hurwitz, and James. Julie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Joe Biden on the ground there, the big news here this morning, he was talking to a group of auto workers and basically gets in an argument with one of the workers around Biden's Second Amendment gun rights policies. And in typical Joe Biden fashion, he calls the guy, says he's full of, and I can't say SHIT on air, but I can spell it, I guess. I don't know if that's legal, but I think that's okay. And then basically starts pointing at the man with quite a bit of energy. So that's Joe Biden there making inroads with voters here heading to the polls. A lot of people have been at the polls all morning. You've been out there. What have people had to say, and what are you seeing there on the ground?
Well, it's been quite an interesting past few days, going back to Friday when I was part of the group that went to hear Bernie speak at Cobo Arena, which is the largest conference center in downtown Detroit, where 7,000 to 8,000 people gathered. And what's been striking has been the sort of disconnect that we are hearing about on mass media and the people I'm actually speaking to on the ground. There has been this mass dissemination of views that Bernie does not resonate within the black community, that he doesn't have the support of the African-American electorate the way that Biden does. And I hosted 20 canvassers who drove up from Indiana this past weekend, in the weekend canvassing in Detroit. And some stories that I heard from the dyed-in-the-wool Biden supporters among the older African-American community is that they are unfortunately it's inexplicable to me how some of the people who are backing Biden don't really know why they're backing him. They cannot point to any concrete gains or accomplishments that he or the Obama administration accomplished for them or their community, and yet they have convinced themselves that he's the guy. On the other hand, I spent this morning 2 hours at a polling place in a almost entirely black voting district and spoke to every single person who walked in to go vote between 7 and 9 this morning. And without, I would say, can't even remember how many people I spoke to, but clearly 8 out of 10 people I spoke to, when I said, "Are you voting this morning? Cast your vote for Bernie," and they say, "I am. I'm going to vote for Bernie." And so there is a real sort of grassroots, below the radar, it seems to me, pretty surprisingly broad support for Bernie's platform, what he stands for, and knowing that in their hearts, they vote their hearts, it would be without doubt, Bernie would be the guy.
What are some of the issues that are propelling those Bernie Sanders voters in your estimate there in the state of Michigan?
Well, he speaks to the issues that are actually impacting this community on a daily basis. Student loan debt. The polling place I was at this morning was a middle school. And so several of the people walking into the building were just working there. They were just teachers, and they were going to be voting somewhere else later today. And one woman was interviewed by the Washington Post, who were camped outside the school, and she talked about how much she liked Biden. She had been a Biden supporter for years. She was probably in her late 30s, early 40s, African-American school teacher. And she said, "I'm voting for Bernie on eliminating student debt." So that's a big issue for a lot of voters here.
Yeah, I was really surprised, Julie, about Joe Biden's reemergence there in the state of Michigan. I was there for the July debate, and the biggest thing I noticed was just the lack of energy towards Joe Biden. I had been in Miami, and at those first two debates, you didn't really get who was going to get the most energy from the masses of people kind of surrounding the convention or the theater that held the debate, because you had, I think it was like Sanders and Biden on one night, you had Warren and Kamala Harris at the time, who was the other front runner, on another night. And so there was kind of just both energy, both two nights. And then in Detroit, you had on the first night Sanders and Warren, and you had tons of people, tons of energy. And the second night, it was Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. There's almost no one out on the streets, and there's just a huge noticeable lack of energy for Joe Biden. And while I was there, Julie, in Detroit, I went up to Flint for the day and to talk to different people in Flint about where they saw the Democratic Party. And I had a chance to sit down with Pastor Jeff Hawkins, his wife April Hawkins, and several members of the Prince of Peace Missionary Baptist Church about the lasting legacy of the water crisis in their community, how they felt the Democratic Party and Barack Obama responded to the man-made disaster. I want to play a few clips that I was able to record while I was there in Flint. Here's April Hawkins speaking about Barack Obama's visit to Flint at the height of the crisis and how she was disappointed by the former president's response.
President Obama, when he came to Flint, it kind of gave me a different perspective on him, only because even hearing him coming to Flint, I was excited because I knew, okay, we are about to get some change. He knew that Flint is 90% African American. Oh, it's about to go on. Right, he's about to fix this water crisis. But when he got here, he kind of minimized the crisis. He took a sip of water as if it was Flint water to basically say, this is my action. Because people are visual. A lot of people are visual. So if they see him drink the water, immediately they're going to think, oh, well, maybe the water is safe. So he kind of
said about the children with the lead.
He even said, lead is not a big issue. When I was younger, I used to eat lead, off the paint, the windowsill and things.
And here is Barack Obama at that event to give you a sense in the tone of how Barack Obama was speaking to a crowd in the midst of a crisis that he was basically going to say, everything is fine, we got the whole problem fixed.
Where do we go from here? Well, I'm still waiting for my water. Somebody obviously didn't hear me. Usually I get my water pretty quick. I really did need a glass of water. This is not a stunt.
Not a stunt. Yeah, I'm sure not a stunt. I'm sure everybody thought Barack Obama was really going to drink water directly from the taps of Flint. And talking to Flint residents, they talked about at the school that they were at where Barack Obama gave that speech, all of the water faucets and drinking fountains were all masked and taped off. So you couldn't even get water from the building he was in. But yet, as we mentioned, their action and people see it and they said, oh, the problem must be solved. That Barack Obama is telling us the problem solved. Well, to this day, over 4,000 residents still need water delivered to their homes, and they're still in the midst of a crisis, not only in Flint, but across the country. And this is where one of the members of Pastor Hawkins' church, in his own word, talked about his complete disillusionment towards the Democratic Party and how he was sick of the Democratic Party taking him and others like him in Flint for granted.
Well, I think we've done the same thing with the Democrat Party. Mm-hmm. We've been thrown under the bus so many times. We've seen so many Democrats that has not made good on their word, and we're constantly trying to either make an excuse for them or vote for them again because they're Democrats. Yeah. I think that is unfortunate and is unfair, and it's not just to the people. So for me, no, I want to be true to truth.
So, Julie, yesterday, in complete disgust, I see Joe Biden in Flint along with Cory Booker talking to voters, asking for their vote and promising that they would deliver for the people in that city and across the state. How dare Joe Biden walk back into that city and say he'll do anything different than Barack Obama, the guy he ties himself to in every single moment. I'm curious, though. It seems like some people will turn out, though, and vote for Joe Biden regardless of this. I'm just kind of curious what the mindset of people are. Is it just simply, as Jamarl says, keeping the monsters at bay? They somehow are familiar enough with Biden that they'll turn back to him? Or is there going to be a huge crisis if the Democratic Party puts up somebody like Joe Biden, who is linked to the legacy of Barack Obama and the Flint water crisis?
Well, I want to say I was in Flint when Barack Obama did that stunt. And I was with a group of activists. I happen to represent the community of Flint in several class action lawsuits that we have brought, constitutional civil rights claims, as a result of the water crisis, the travesty. And the level of outrage, I couldn't agree more with Pastor Hawkins. The level of visceral outrage at what Obama did on that television screen when he drank that water, you could feel it in your bones when you were up there. It was outrageous. And the people in Flint have not forgotten. And I would be absolutely shocked if Bernie did not win whatever happens in the rest of the state, if he did not win an overwhelming victory in Flint partly because of that.
But I guess I only push back is because Gretchen Whitmer did quite well there in Flint, who is the establishment candidate for the Democrats. Dr. Abdul El-Sayed actually finished in third place in the Flints of the world. So something is still holding a lot of these voters to the Democratic establishment, despite the material conditions still being the conditions that were there under Barack Obama.
Because Gretchen campaigned brilliantly and convinced us all that she was truly a progressive. Now, that has proven to be wrong, and she has just continued the same bull, S-H-I-T, as the Democratic Party is do. So you asked a question about yesterday. Cory Booker going up there. Why would people vote for Biden? Well, the story that I've been getting through the telephone banking I've been doing, through the people I've been talking to, through my clients, like I said, I represent the community of Flint in these class action lawsuits. Their decision to vote for Biden, I believe, comes from a couple of sources. First, the mass media, which has been bought out lock, stock, and barrel, has convinced a lot of people that Bernie can't win. And they've said to me, I agree with everything he says. I think that he really resonates with me. I love him, but he can't win. He can't win because he's a socialist. He can't win because the people who support him are too intolerant. They've bought into the Pete Buttigieg line that his platform is divisive, which is outrageous to me, because if there's any platform that is unifying as opposed to divisive, it's Bernie's platform. And I think that Bernie has a bit of a handicap in his comfort level dealing with issues of race and racism. While I believe to the core of my being that he is an adamant ally to the African-American community in every way.
Yeah. Jamarl, seemingly on cue here, MSNBC brings on Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, who has endorsed Biden. So quite perfect timing there. They're definitely pushing out all the progressives for Biden today.
I listened to the thing for Obama. I've seen that clip before, and I was apoplectic the first time I saw it. I mean, in real terms, I've made the point that Joe Biden has been using African Americans as token props, be it the South America thing, be it the civil rights thing when he wasn't necessarily working towards the civil rights. And even Obama did that. I mean, but the water, so, let me drink the water. All of these people were either ill, many of which were poor, and then, having to deal with either lead poisoning or some kind of other disease for their particular kid going forward. Nothing that they've done wrong, everything just the factor of poverty. And to have the black president go there and to use them as tokens like that, it's aggravating to me. Wow. I'm curious. You're on the ground there, and you've been able to talk to the various people going in and out in the polling locations. You said they couldn't necessarily put their finger on why they were backing Biden. And yet, do they still have this healthy understanding that Obama, despite him being black, it became an issue of class, that he wasn't necessarily looking out for their best material interests, and that Biden, for the most part, is the same? I guess what I'm getting at is, do they make those two connections together? The fact that, we backed Obama, but Obama didn't necessarily back us when we were drinking lead-laced water.
Well, I can tell you the people in Flint were outraged at Obama's actions that day. Absolutely outraged. But it's hard to generalize. There are some who do see the real picture and who are connecting the dots and are genuinely hearing what Bernie is saying. At the same time, there are those who just there is it's hard to describe Michigan black politics, and as a white person, I stand one step removed, obviously, but I've been living in Detroit since 1982, and I've been involved in civil rights issues consistently since that time. And the politics of Michigan, and in particular Detroit, where I live, there is this sort of fuzzy line between race and class that is unique. And so there is this mindset among some people that what Obama represented was such a sea change in their lives, and it's true, he did. Never in their lives would they ever have imagined that an African American could actually be elected president, and that is huge. And so people have clung on to that, and because Biden was a loyal Obama vice president, they've just sort of wiped out the daily reality of the contradictions and just latched on to, this is a guy who is our friend, and we want our friend in the White House.
Yeah, those are all very insightful points. A big thank you to Julie Hurwitz there in Detroit, a civil rights attorney with the firm Goodman, Hurwitz, and James. Julie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I do want to just get in one caller before we go to break here. Frank, thank you for being patient and waiting there. You're on the air with Political Misfits. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Good afternoon, Jamal and Bob.
Hey.
What's going on, man?
Hey, Jamal. Last year you interviewed Jordan Sheridan.
Yes.
Currently in Michigan right now. He was able to go to a Joe Biden rally. It was a private one. But he was asking, or actually Jen, his coworker, was asking actual voters. They had no clue on anything about what Biden has said or has done.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Let's get into more Biden cognitive functioning after the break here. Let's take a quick break. Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. Back after this in Washington, D.C.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Files TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody. My name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns. Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamarl Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning, I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day. I tune to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with Iron Man Bob Schlehuber. We've been discussing everything surrounding Mini Super Tuesday, the states, the polling, the predictions, and the stakes, meaning what has the campaign or what has to happen tonight for Sanders to keep his chances alive. If you would like to get in on the conversation, give us a call at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. I'm going to go into our typical segment for this one, but I have to be honest, that last caller is aggravating to me. I mean, basically, look, one of the biggest arguments I've made for the last 2 years, you can look back at my show, was that Sanders has a problem going after his opponents. And sometimes I don't mean you have to be mean. I don't mean you have to be nasty. I don't mean you have to, rib Biden. And even Sanders at his worst will be more ethical and authentic than most people at their best. You need to show when somebody is lying. You need to show contrast. You need to be able to show that this person said this, but that's not true. And if the only thing that you're doing is talking about your policies and the best aspects of your nature, you may allow somebody to put a narrative forward that is not true at all. Whereas you may be the person who is more in line with what that person wants. You can't accept, or you can't necessarily take for granted that the public is aware of all of these other items, be it the civil rights movement, be it Biden lying about South Africa, be it lying about Social Security. I mean, if you want to make that point clear, when Joe Biden was lying about Social Security in Iowa and New Hampshire, he collapsed in those states. Why? Because he got caught in a lie. I mean, the same thing is true with the Medicare for All stuff. People do not like campaigns when they are caught flagrantly lying, and it is worrisome that Sanders didn't necessarily make that all that much clear, as opposed to just kind of talking about the angels of his nature. There are times you have to eat your Brussels sprouts. No, you don't necessarily like veggies, but there are times, if you're in a political space, you have to eat your veggies. It just kind of comes with the territory. Look, as I mentioned in the monologue, Sanders had a barn burner of a town hall last night in Michigan. Strangely enough, whereas he has been doing a media blitz, Biden has been doing the opposite, with his people trying to hide him, not wanting him to self-own. If Sanders is pouring it on and Biden is trying to self-own, here's the catch. You can only hide your candidate away so much. There's reporting from Axios on Biden's campaign on what he's thinking about regarding the administration. And if this is correct, the tone deafness of Joe Biden's campaign rivals the mendacity of Hillary Clinton. Biden's advisors describe a quote-unquote return to normal plan, reversing Trump's unorthodox style to surround himself with people that Joe Biden trusts. And some of this stuff is weird policy combinations, like Elizabeth Warren and Jamie Dimon being floated for the same position of Treasury Secretary. It's so weird. Like,
Bizarre.
It's just a
Nobody's
grab
paying
bag.
attention, though. I mean, that's at some point. I mean, that's the thing. I think I forget a lot of being here in the bubble. I can name all 22 main Democratic presidential candidates, right?
Yeah.
And I think you probably could get up there quite a
get up
few of
there,
them, if not a few more random people that got in there. We forget that name recognition is what wins for so many people. People aren't paying attention to policies. They don't know the difference between these candidates. Even like people that are relatively informed are still not quite certain the difference between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. They were both senators.
Which is mind-blowing, right? I mean, like, I think
maybe, but at the same time, civil discourse, civil education, civics has been completely eroded from schools. And then you have a dumbed down media. You have Congress talking to everybody like they're eighth graders. You have a majority of people that are just trying to survive, or tons of people that have been completely sidelined by the political process. Citizens United basically said, if you don't have a ton of money, your voice does not matter in the political process.
Well, wait. I do think people know the difference between them. I mean, if you ask people policy or if you ask people on issues of trust, they would say, yeah, we believe Sanders.
I think they would. I think they would lean more into the character and consistency of Sanders before they could articulate and differentiate between policies. And maybe when it comes to like Medicare for all versus Biden wants something else, but at the end of the day, Biden still wants like healthcare for everyone.
Yeah, I do think that.
Even Medicare for all gets like, well, you couldn't know how many people can articulate the difference between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on Medicare for all, or even their kind of their wealth tax versus different marginal rates and stuff, into the weeds on that. Not many people, but the character thing, I think you're right on.
Yeah.
And that's where I think you are most frustrated, is like, Bernie Sanders, please, for the love of God, expose this, because this is where you win. Get into the weeds on policy.
That's how you
How
win.
many times does he have to explain how the Medicare for all thing works? Either people got it and they're good from day one, or they're just done. Stop being baited by the media every time you're in these debates.
I honestly think it's people's expectations are so deadened. Like, they've gotten so accustomed to not being able to get anything real accomplished, just kind of just grand incrementalism, that they will look at Biden and be like, fair enough. That's good enough for me. And it's like, what? How's that good enough for you? There's no point to this reality. I mean, people choose. You go and you choose what you want and how we decide to organize. And that also boils down to what we cover as a society, what things that we believe are in our best interest of human beings, whether that's education, whether that's healthcare. We choose that stuff.
Yeah.
There's no God to instantiate that society has to be this way or that way. Those things are choices. And I think that's where it becomes difficult for Sanders, because people have, for the last 40, 50 years, look, people oftentimes just go with relative difference. You know, like, what's the distinction between where we are now versus where we want to go? And Sanders, who says what most people would agree with, yeah, we should have health care. Or, yeah, people should be able to go to school. By the same token, when it comes down to choosing that person, they are sketchy with whether or not that can win. And that misses that Clinton lost, Gore lost, Kerry lost, all of these creatures of the party lost. And the one guy that was screaming about hope and change, that guy won. Yeah. Meaning, when they looked at Obama and they were like, yeah, this hope and change stuff, I don't know if that's going to... No, that actually worked because what people wanted was something fundamentally different. The only difference here is that you have somebody who is that fundamental difference, but either doesn't have the ideological bearing, is either not strong enough to make it work, whatever that thing is. He drops the ball on this stuff sometimes. Yeah. But let me go to Biden real quick. There's a clip of Joe Biden on Lawrence O'Donnell talking about a low bar. Joe Biden is arguing. Listen to what Joe Biden says on Medicare for All, and this goes to this notion of tone deaf. Whereas the number one issue that people care about is health care across the board, especially if you're talking about Democrats. Medicare for all, even in states that Joe Biden won, still got over 50% in regards to popularity. And nevertheless, Joe Biden on Lawrence O'Donnell, when asked if Medicare for all was passed in the House and in the Senate, what would you as president do? Let's hear Joe Biden.
Let's assume, and I've asked other candidates this kind of question, veto question. Let's flash forward. You're president. Bernie Sanders is still active in the Senate. He manages to get Medicare for all through the Senate in some compromised version, the Elizabeth Warren version or other version. Nancy Pelosi gets a version of it through the House of Representatives. It comes to your desk. Do you veto it?
I would veto anything that delays providing the security and the certainty of health care being available now.
That's absurd. I mean, there's nothing that stops health care from being available immediately by pushing through Medicare for all. And not to mention,
pushing through Medicare for all in a situation where healthcare is not being addressed now. We're in a radically different political moment if it's somehow passing the House and the Senate. For him to be playing these crazy
he's
hypotheticals.
Yeah, that's okay.
But what about now?
Do you know what would have to happen for Medicare for all to be passed by the House, meaning Nancy Pelosi passing Medicare for all, and the Senate, meaning Chuck Schumer passing the Medicare for all, and the president is like, yeah, that's okay.
Nah.
That's okay. Nah, that's all right. And we're in the middle of a health crisis, of an epidemic.
Probably because his Republican vice president told him not to sign it into law.
Is that what it was? Yeah, don't do it. Don't sign it.
Points of Republican. Great.
And whatever you guys want to think about the cognitive decline thing, look, go back and look at Joe Biden in 2008. Look at Joe Biden now. He is a whisper of himself. He is a whisper of a man. But even that part, putting that to the side for the moment, the flagrant lying should bother you. So this is Joe Biden, again, talking to Lawrence O'Donnell in this interview. Listen to what he says about Saddam Hussein and nuclear weapons.
Look, the reason I voted the way I did was to try to prevent a war from happening because, remember, the threat was to go to war. The argument was because Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. So he said that I need to be able to get the Security Council to agree to send in inspectors to put pressure on Saddam to find out whether or not he's producing nuclear weapons. And at the time, I said, that's your reason. All right, I get it. That was the rationale was that's the way to not go to war because I didn't believe he had those nuclear weapons. I didn't believe he had those weapons of mass destruction. And you may remember the debates we had after that period about when Colin said, anyway. So that was the rationale. What happened was we went in, determined that they hyped what in fact was occurring. They didn't, there was no concrete proof of what he was doing, and they still went to war.
All right, so A, that's incoherent on one part, and on the other part, he's lying. Because basically, the Washington Post, I'll read it to you. Mr. Powell's evidence, including satellite photographs, audio recordings, and reports from detainees and other informants, was overwhelming. Senator Joseph R. Biden Jr., the senior Democrat on Foreign Relations Committee, called it powerful and irrefutable. Powerful and irrefutable. And now, either he doesn't remember or he's lying, and it could be a little bit of both. You would think that since he's sitting across from a news person, that the news person would say, well, sir, I was around during that time, and you are not telling the truth. But again, this is the low bar for Joe Biden.
Yeah, I mean, soon after he said, I would do it again. I would vote the same way. We were only sending them in to find nuclear weapons now is rather absurd. And on top of that, he said, oh, the incompetence of the Bush administration shouldn't be pinned on us. You were the one that gave him the power to do those things. Why would you say he's incompetent and then allow him to take the United States into war? We got a few callers here who have been patiently waiting. Let's get to some of these calls. Tyrese, thank you as always for calling in. You're on Political Misfits. What's on your mind today?
How you doing, gentlemen?
What's going on, man?
I want to talk about Flint and Detroit. I don't know how strong Bernie Sanders' ground game was in Detroit and Flint, but most people forgot about Detroit as well, dealing with the water situation. The city was cutting off people water in Detroit of low-income people, and Dr. Reverend Pickney, I don't know if y'all heard of him, he was fighting like crazy to keep those people water on. Bernie Sanders' campaign could have hooked up with Pickney and other organizers and to work with, the city to get Bernie Sanders out there about, name out there about infrastructure and things like that. Same thing with Flint. What y'all think about that?
Yeah, I think he missed several points there in Flint. I mean, in Flint, you can drive to downtown Flint, part of a city that wasn't hit by the water crisis, as if the man-made crisis was targeting certain populations. Yeah. You can see a farmer's market. You can see white business owners. You see all the good times happening there in so many cities across America. And that's what Bernie Sanders is trying to speak to. And like you said, maybe some of that grassroots organizing, those on-the-ground touches he wasn't able to reach out to. We have Stedman on the line. Stedman is a Detroit voter. You can tell us a little bit more, Stedman, of what you've seen in Michigan and about what Bernie Sanders has or has not been able to do regarding connecting with Flint and Detroit voters.
So, I campaigned for him Saturday. I went and canvassed. I went to the rally Friday. And I think he's really got a lot of support here in the black community. I think a lot of people overestimate Joe Biden's support because of his relationship with Obama. A lot of Michigan voters, a lot of black Detroit voters, a lot of black Michigan voters. I don't think they have that same affiliation or affinity for Obama that a lot of maybe Southern voters have. So I think Bernie's going to do well. Most of my family is voting. All my family's voting for Bernie. I don't really see Biden I don't think he's going to do as well as people think. So.
All right, well, vote early and often, as they say, Stedman, if that is the case. We have another caller. Al, thank you for patiently waiting. You want to talk a little bit about Bernie versus Biden?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys watched Bernie's town halls recently. He spends more time attacking Trump or trying to exhort young people to participate more in the campaign than he does attacking Biden or drawing a distinction between himself and Biden.
Why do you think that is?
I think he's probably, he's spent 40 years or a couple decades in the political machine. That has to do something to you. Like whatever sort of radical politics or practice a person may have, if they spend that long in that place, they're just going to, I think they just lose their edge.
Yeah, that's interesting. Al, any other comments you wanted to make there?
Yeah, no, that's it.
Great, thanks, Al, for the call. And yeah,
I don't know if you lose your edge. I look, Sanders has gone for decades without doing hit videos, or doing attack ads or those type of things. I think it really does boil down to that aspect that people love about him, his supporters love about him, is also the factor that allows him to be that way.
I think he's just nervous. He doesn't want to be the guy that gets blamed again for Trump getting reelected. And all the mean things he said about Joe Biden, as if Joe Biden's cognitive disabilities isn't going to be anything more challenging to him than what Bernie Sanders could possibly say. Beverly, thank you for calling back in. You want to talk about voter fraud here?
Yes. That you had one caller that said that they didn't believe that Bernie could win. Well, I don't think he can either with them taking his votes and doing something with it. The people are voting for Bernie.
Now, Beverly, can you explain what's going on currently in California?
Well, all them millions, there was 3 million and something votes that just disappeared. And then all of a sudden they showed up. Well, now, so far, the last time I checked, they had 1 million and something counted, and most of those people were going for Bernie. It's not just California. It's all the states that Biden is winning. The votes they're doing, somehow or another, the DNC is doing something with the votes.
Yeah, definitely questions. Beverly, thank you for the call. We'll continue to talk about voter suppression and a lot of these abnormalities in some of the exit polls and some of the results. Quite a bit of questions to keep an eye on. If it was messed up in Iowa, I'm sure there's plenty more conversations to be had and to be looked at, but so much of that inertia and momentum kind of just overcrowds any of those stories that now maybe have questions.
Yeah.
It's just kind of gone in the news cycle, how quickly it moves on to the next thing, on to the next thing. Sebastian, thank you for calling in. We got about 30 seconds left here for comments before we go to the end of the hour break.
Sure. I only wanted to mention that there are certain very interesting and very small changes that Bernie could do to change the messaging that could really improve such things. Like if you talk about the basic concept of healthcare, like internet connections, where you're okay with having internet, but when you realize that Chattanooga, Tennessee has had up and down 1 gigabyte per second for years since 2014, you go, wait a minute, I'm not okay with my current plan. Like they can get 1 gig down, but they can't get 1 gig up on most Comcast cables, and you realize it's being limited at the point of service. Like this is a basic argument that could easily be reframed, and it probably could make a huge difference if he was willing to just turn it up and go, you don't realize how bad you have it until you realize how good you could have it.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you, Sebastian, for the call. One last call here. Adam, thank you for calling in. What's on your mind?
Hey, so really I just want to kind of vent, and it's kind of in the same vein as the last caller. I just don't understand why Bernie Sanders doesn't change his strategy, why the campaign itself doesn't change his strategy in terms of like changing his rhetoric. We all know that the people are behind him when it comes to the issues like Medicare for all and stuff, if the exit polls are to be believed. So why can't he just, you know, like I don't know if you guys know about Kyle Kalinske. He actually said something, it was actually perfect. He said he needs to campaign and position himself as the moderate in the race so that, and just change the conversation such that Joe Biden is looked at as the extremist.
Yeah, Adam, all great points. Thank you so much for your call.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's an election. You can't just change overnight. I mean, you know, your rhetoric and whatever you're saying. It's kind of like a chess game. Once you're 20 moves in, it's not like those moves disappear. You're stuck with the board that you got. And you can't flip on the switch and saying, okay, now I'm going to attack Joe Biden and throw everything against the wall. It looks a little weird tonally to kind of just say I'm going to talk about policy then and just go after the guy. But I do think there's something to be said for taking a certain position and certain tact. And maybe that is the argument that you make. You know, I'm not the radical
Some
one.
of it's so crazy to me. I just remember after Trump won talking to like younger liberally people, and they said, look, if Trump's going to lie, Democrats need to start lying too. If we're going to play dirty politics, let's get dirty. And it's just like that's the world we're in, that Joe Biden's lies are more acceptable than consistency and truth.
Yeah.
And that's what people are appealed to. Whatever he says, it must be right. Who cares if he's lying? We just got to beat Trump.
Or they'll compare it to Trump. They'll say, well, I mean, he's not as bad as Trump. He's not as corrupt as Trump. It is like, why are you making comparisons about somebody who's corrupt? Why would you want somebody who's corrupt at all?
And that's your response is to, just double down on the Trumpian era of lying. And you see these like random, I think there was an opinion that Washington Post published basically talking like every day Sanders becomes more Trump-like. And it's just like, what? Based on what? And they were like comparing the fact that Trump was getting millions of dollars and Biden was getting $1 million from super PACs. And they're like, well, Sanders has also gotten money from PACs. And it was about a story about how the Nurses Association had given him $1.5 million.
It's like our revolution.
Comparing money from billionaires to nurses.
Chris Matthews did that when Nina Turner was on the show, and he was like, well, Bernie is trying to bribe him just like Bloomberg. It's like, what are you talking about? Well, he's trying to give people health care and education. It's like, you think that those two things are the same.
Wild times, Jamarl. Well, we have another hour for you guys, so stick with us. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. We come back at the start of the hour live from North Dakota. They're also at kind of a hybrid caucus primary. We'll learn more about that after the break. You're listening to Political Misfits live in Washington, D.C. on Radio Sputnik. We're back after this.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. It was a quick break there between our first hour and second hour, trying to catch my breath. A lot of news here as voters return to the polls in 6 states here on Mini Super Tuesday. You get credit for coining that phrase, Mini Super Tuesday?
I think so, yeah.
I kind of like that. Trademark that, maybe.
I appreciate
There's
it.
a few more Tuesdays to come. Mini Super Tuesday.
Super Tuesday didn't seem right because we've had our Super Tuesday, so it was like, well, this is kind of a mini Super
one.
Tuesday.
It's a mini one. A lot to talk about beyond voting as well. We'll also hit coronavirus updates and much, much more. We do want to first turn our attention to our guest joining us from North Dakota. That's Ruth Buffalo, a member of the North Dakota House of Representatives. Ruth is the first Native American Democratic woman elected to the North Dakota legislature. Ruth, thank you so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, you're there in North Dakota. Bernie Sanders was able to win the caucus there in 2016 by a wide margin over Hillary Clinton. Give us a sense of what the mood there is in North Dakota, and for the political wonks that are listening, tell us a little bit more about the new caucus process there in the state of North Dakota.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of excitement today. As you can tell, I lost my voice. So polls just opened at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, and the lines are getting very long. So we're hoping that doesn't turn people away. The polls will be open until 7 p.m. today, and so there's a lot of excitement across the state. There's 14 different polling locations across the state of North Dakota. You can vote at any polling location, and you don't have to reside in that particular city. So that's going to be a different twist to it this year as opposed to caucusing as a group. So this year it's just show up to the polls and vote. So we're hoping to see a big turnout. We're hopeful. But again, it's another new method that we're using this year or this time around.
Yeah, it seemed like Joe Biden was doing fairly well amongst voters there in North Dakota. Again, using polls, not the greatest barometer, but it at least tells us that he may have some headwinds. I'm kind of curious, what led to Bernie Sanders winning by so much there in 2016, but then yet kind of seemed him kind of, I don't want to say decline, or at least how is Joe Biden able to put up pretty tough fight against the senator there, Sanders, in the state of North Dakota?
Well, I think if everybody gets out and votes, we would be more of a bluer state than we are currently. To me, Bernie Sanders' message resonates with me because as an Indigenous woman, as a mom, he has been fighting the same fight consistently throughout his entire lifetime. And being a person from a disenfranchised community, Bernie Sanders really speaks to my family, to my community, and to me. So we're hoping again for a really good turnout. We do know that Biden has a lot of prominent, if you will, endorsers behind him at this time, but we're looking for bold new changes and to step away from the status quo.
I also thought of you there in North Dakota and the Indigenous organizers, activists, and peoples. I was thinking a lot about all of you and how much you guys have been left out of much of the political process by obviously the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And it struck me as quite, I don't even know, disappointing, but obviously not surprising when Hillary Clinton was speaking to Fareed Zakaria this Sunday on GPS. And Hillary Clinton was talking about how she built a really broad coalition, and now she sees Joe Biden doing that similar coalition building. And that's what's kind of propelled him to be a front runner here. I want to play that clip here of Hillary Clinton talking about this broad coalition that she's seen Joe Biden be able to build over the last year.
I think what Joe's victories on Super Tuesday showed is that he is building the kind of coalition that I have, basically. It's a broad-based coalition.
You lost.
Yeah. So what do you think about that, Ruth, about this broad coalition? Does he have a broad coalition in North Dakota, or is it a subset group of people that he's been able to really mobilize?
Well, I consider myself a newbie to the North Dakota political arena, even though I was basically born into poor policies. For example, being born in 1977, a year later, it wasn't until the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was enacted, which meant that my family could practice our religion freely versus underground or being scared that we would be persecuted for practicing our spirituality. So along those lines, I do know that Bernie's message does resonate with so many of us across broad ranges of ages, and a lot, in particular, the grassroots community, and to people who are not the cookie-cutter politician or come from wealthy families or wealthy networks. And so I think that's really important to see people power behind a particular candidate that will not be afraid to address structural changes that we need so much throughout our entire country. And we see a lot of suffering firsthand here in North Dakota, where people do not have access to quality health care, much less the right to vote. And so I really hope that today we will have a good turnout and that our young people, old people, all ages come out and support their candidate of choice.
Ruth, I have two questions. One has to do with the politics of North Dakota itself, meaning what are the main issues within the context of North Dakota revolving around politics, one of the most important issues. And the second one is secondary, and it's an issue related to Warren, actually. My grandfather was a Cherokee. He was half Cherokee or quarter Cherokee. This wasn't somebody who was distant relative. I mean, he was my he was my grandfather. And so when Warren comes up with the Native American issue, I've heard multiple people have different takes on this, including people within the context of the Native American community itself. Meaning, I'm curious, how do you take that? Or is there kind of a perception of this kind of cultural appropriation and whether or not, there should be consequences for the cultural appropriation? Or is it just not an issue?
So back to your first question about the current issues in North Dakota. Right now we have, like many other states in the Midwest, a health professional shortage. We have people in very rural communities that are not able to access the care they need when they need it. For example, behavioral health services, addiction treatment services. We have done a lot of improvement within these past 4 years or so, but we're still very much on the tip of the iceberg. We have opioids as a huge crisis right now that intersects with meth use and all kinds of other drug use. In particular, the opioids and meth are very predominant across North Dakota and across the region and the country. And so we have to find ways to address our rural communities so that our rural communities don't get left behind. The other issue, I can't speak specifically to the views of the Cherokee Nation with regards to Senator Elizabeth Warren. I do know, as an Indigenous woman, Native American, member of a federally recognized tribe, which is very complex in itself, even stating that, because that method was put in place intentionally to erase us from existence, so to speak. If you dig deep on the process of why we have to be members of a federally recognized tribe in order to receive services that were promised through treaty obligations, which were supposed to be the law of the land, but every treaty has been broken. But the average American doesn't know this bit of information because Native Americans, our true history was left out of history books completely, in the K through 12 curriculum. Yes, there are some states that are working diligently to address this so that the more we know, the more education people have, the less stereotypes and division is out there. But we have to have these uncomfortable conversations in order to get to a place of peace. So in terms of Senator Elizabeth Warren, I can't speak directly to that out of respect of being from a different tribal nation. But I do know that we do have people in different arenas who will try to use their stating they're Native American in order to push a certain agenda, but then we find out later that nobody knows them from that community, or there weren't meaningful relationships, and so it brings into question the intentions, because normally we want to amplify the voices of those closest to the pain. Okay, and so there's so much complexity around that question, but in fairness and to be simple, I can't speak directly to it because I'm not from that tribal nation.
This is Ruth Buffalo here on Political Misfits. Ruth is a member of the North Dakota House of Representatives. We were talking before the break here, Ruth, with people there in Detroit talking about the Flint water crisis, something that happened under the Obama administration. The other big crisis there, at least in my eyes, was the horrific attack of Standing Rock protesters and the continued efforts to build the Dakota Access Pipeline. Yes. And now you have Joe Biden, who's attached himself at the hip with Barack Obama on so many issues. For me, I don't know how this isn't coming back to bite him, of how it's not been brought up. What about the Obama administration's reliance on the continuing fracking as well as fossil fuels? And here Joe Biden is saying something about, oh, we'll phase things out. Oh, we'll have a plan by whatever, 2050. Everything is punting down the road. Well, at the same moment, pipelines continue to be built. Oil continues to leak from these pipelines, and people's land continues to be taken from them. And so when all these politicians talk about the environmental fixes they're going to make some years down the line, it's absurd to me, and it angers me immensely because there is no going back and fixing past policies on environment. Once there's oil in the water, that oil is going to be there. Once it's contaminated forever. And so I'm kind of curious the mindset of people that have been fighting and working so hard that if Biden ends up being the nomination, I just can't imagine how many people, especially young people who have been turning out for Sanders, will simply be done with electoral politics. They'll simply say, why am I continuing to turn back to the party that threw us under the bus, both of these parties, and you're asking me to turn out and vote for them again? I think we're going to see historic low turnouts here in North Dakota today or possibly there in November. And I'm just kind of curious what you think about people's mindset or mentality towards the electoral process if they take another loss here.
Again, as a newbie to the political arena, so to speak, and holding elected office, a few years ago I was the party secretary here in North Dakota. And, from seeing the results of Super Tuesday, where Biden was basically, coming in last and then having Klobuchar and Buttigieg endorse him, it was almost like 3 against 1 for Bernie. And so there is a sense of frustration and a level of, quite honestly, being disgusted with this process. And my job and my role, though, is to still continue to encourage people to get out and vote, get out and show up. Nothing is going to change if we don't show up. And quite honestly, it's a recycling, and we need to bring new people, new fresh voices into these arenas, into these circles, because there are people dying. We shouldn't get to a place where we're so out of touch that we continue to recycle within our networks. And whether they're good networks or not, we need change, and things are not going to change until we all show up. As hard as it is, we still have to show up and vote. Otherwise, it's just a tiny few who are going to be making decisions on our behalf. So regardless if we're upset, we still have to show up.
30 seconds. Well, there are a tiny few, you can make an argument, that are making choices on our behalf now. What's after this? If Sanders doesn't do well tonight, if this movement comes to a halt and somebody like Joe Biden exceeds the primary process, what happens? Do people still go and vote for Joe in this? I hope you understand what I'm getting at. Basically, I'm asking is, if this comes to a halt and what we want doesn't take place, do you still turn around and vote for Biden, or should people turn around and vote for Biden, or find some other route outside of just basic politics?
So I've endorsed Senator Sanders, and so I'm encouraging everyone to get out and vote, because in general we have such a low voter turnout rate as it is. Even if we have certain climbs in voter turnout, for example, the 2018 midterm election, we had record numbers of voter turnout, but it was still very low overall. And so we need to get everybody out to the polls, encouraging them to vote. I have endorsed Sanders, and I hope people will choose Bernie Sanders. And so that's my stance. We know that Bernie Sanders can win, and he is pushing against the status quo. He's challenging big corporations. He's challenging the way things have always been done, and we need to get away from the same old, same old. And so I really hope people will vote.
Well, thank you so much. That's Ruth Buffalo, a member of the North Dakota House of Representatives. Ruth, thank you for lending your voice, what you have left of it there. We greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. We have a few callers on the line. We'll take those before we head to a break here on Radio Sputnik Political Misfits. Nadine, thank you for your patience. You wanted to make some comments on the state of affairs on Mini Super Tuesday. Nadine, are you with us?
Hello?
Hey, Nadine. Thank you for waiting with us. What's on your mind?
Oh, sorry about that. Hey, I'm from Detroit. Hey, Jamal.
How goes it? Welcome.
Hey, Bob, you're a genius. Jamal's a genius, too. You guys are... Right. I love you guys. But I am in Detroit. I grew up on 8 Mile. I'm a West Sider. I will tell you what. I got my FCC license when I was 14. My high school had a radio station. And I saw what happened when Clear Channel took over. And, black people, they do not trust media. They have their sources. You know what I'm saying? They never trusted mainstream media. They always had their sources, and our sources are dwindling. It's completely devastating. We cannot get good information. The media has gatekeepers. They're like some Trotskyist jerks, and to limit what we can think about and how we can think about. We've seen this in education. We can't think. Our critical thinking skills. We are children left behind at this point. I think that's why you see a big gap between the conservative older people, and younger people listening to Sanders saying, yeah, let's start a movement.
Thank you, Nadine.
Thank you, Nadine, for the spirited call.
Yes. So I think you're right in part. I think part of it is, look, I think there's a divide between the older generation and the younger generation in regards to, the older generation was able to get certain advantages that the younger generation just doesn't. If you're looking at job, if you're looking at education costs, if you're looking at the amount they're paying for school, if you're looking at for healthcare costs, you're looking at a list of issues that are, or a future that looks far darker for the youth in this country as opposed to the older generation that is on their way out. I think part of the divide lies there. Also, just in the basic notion of what's possible. I think the older generation has very fixed and set ideas on what they believe is possible as opposed to the younger generation that is more along the lines of we're going to the moon.
Yeah, so we have another call here. Jay, you're on the line. Thank you for your patience and calling in to Political Misfits. What's on your mind today?
Hey, what's going on, y'all?
What's going on?
Far. As I always do, but I just had a quick comment about Obama. I agree with y'all 100%. That man, he has a rich history in what I call disrespecting the black community. He has a rich history from going to, Morehouse, the graduation in Morehouse, and he going up there and telling the kids that just graduated, telling them, what this means is that there's no time for excuses. Well, they graduated college. What are you talking about? They know that. Obviously they know that. So all of this stuff, and also just whenever he took the disparity between crack and powder cocaine, he took it from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1, which is still a disparity for one. But beyond that, his administration sued in order to make sure that it wasn't retroactive, meaning those black men that got caught up in the crack game back in the 80s, they're still sitting in jail for all of those years. So it's just so much, and we still praise the ground that he walks on. We still love the former First Family. We still love to see them. I just need for the black community to just do away with symbolism. I'm not saying that symbolism doesn't have its place, because it does. It just doesn't have as big as a role in politics that we've had. But that's it. Y'all have a good day.
Thank you, Jay.
I just wanted to none of this stuff is funny, but it's funny, about Cory Booker reportedly telling people that at a Joe Biden fundraiser in Detroit Monday night that he had heard Jim Clyburn of South Carolina refer to Joe Biden as an honorary black man.
Interesting. Interesting. Juanita, all men and women are cretin. You know the thing. Juanita just need to reach the debate. Joe Biden would implode. Yeah, but keep in mind, the issue is the narrative going forward. And Sanders had, like, the worst case of scenarios, having just kind of a lull between Super Tuesday and mini Super Tuesday. We need to just get to the debate where Joe Biden will soil himself on stage. He's been doing that every debate. And the media, again, look, I agree with you. I think part of the reason why I didn't necessarily take the perspective that the election was over, because ultimately Joe Biden is in the race, and ultimately he's, it's Joe Biden. But the establishment has wrapped their arms around him, and every advantage that Sanders needed to take, he had to take it. So I give you that. One last thing about Obama, and we can close this part out. Look, I agree with you. Obama, this is the reason why I tend to be more along the lines of class as opposed to identity. And I think this is the reason why lefties are just distrustful of identity at this point. Obama, him being black, didn't stop him from giving 95% of the income gains to the top 1%. Him being black didn't stop him from going to Flint, where all of these other black people who loved him to death, where he would use them as tokens and pretend as if the water was okay while their kids were drinking water that was contaminated with lead. I mean, even the notion of pot and cocaine, the pot disparity, the notion that Obama, who is a flagrant pot smoker himself and was a liberal, both of which were the people who Nixon was trying to either put in prison or destroy that particular political coalition. Well, that didn't stop Obama from still allowing those people to still get locked up over pot possession.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's a list of issues, and all of these issues materially affect people's lives. That's the issue that I'm making here when I'm so distrustful of this issue of looking at these things entirely through the lens of identity, when in reality, you can be black, you can be white, you can be gay, whatever. I don't care. Each person has their own particular experience. The catch becomes, what policies are you putting through that are materially either benefiting or hurting you and your family and your loved ones, et cetera, et cetera? I think that's the thing that matters more. And I think until African Americans, or for that matter, anybody else who's in the Democratic Party gets that, and gets that in a flesh-to-bone way where they don't just give their vote over to any random person, then you're going to get these kind of weird tonalistic differences.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Kamala Harris's political future.
Pretty much.
Basically. And it's disgusting. Kamala Harris, of all people, laughing about, I smoked weed.
Yeah.
Well, you also put people in jail for smoking weed. It's not
Yes,
that
you
funny,
were.
Kamala Harris. What's the material conditions and the laws you're promoting? Anthony, you're in Detroit. Thank you for calling. You wanted to talk about what you're seeing there on Election Day. 6 states have their polls now open for the Democratic presidential primary. Jamarl Thomas, I don't know if you chew your nails, but if you were a nail chewer, I'm sure they would be down to the nubs. Anthony, thanks for calling in. What are you seeing there in Detroit?
Hey, what's going on? Yeah, guys, I called in yesterday, and it was just some things I guess forgot to mention. I should probably talk about out of here. I think one thing Bernie Sanders should probably focus on is kind of like a caller mentioned, a spirited caller you guys mentioned a minute ago, is speaking back to people who historically didn't always trust politicians so blindly and kind of didn't have such a dependence on MSNBC and mainstream media, things like that. And because with my family as a like my black family in particular, I noticed that once I kind of break it down to them and tell them, remind them that we've been sold historically the narrative of the lesser of the two evils, it becomes pretty apparent and obvious that, okay, yeah, I believe it, Joe Biden, you're right about his history and everything, and they are kind of selling that option to him. But canvassing, I had an experience with some people you might call fiscally conservative yet socially liberal that are also likely to have, at one point supported Obama, yet even still have their Republican leanings. I think speaking to that audience and kind of getting across to them, getting them to wake up, because I literally had them tell me, well, don't you think you should identify as an American first and foremost and kind of not worry so much immediately about your black issues and things, that come from them. I think maybe some different dialogue needs to be had with that electorate in particular. some type of message.
Yeah, very insightful, Anthony. Thank you for calling. I hope you call back in tomorrow and tell us the outcome of what you thought happened there in Detroit tomorrow. We have a few more callers on the line here. First, we got Fern. Fern, thank you for calling in.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you for having a great show. What I'm interested in talking about was what allows Bernie to campaign without resorting to low blows and personal insults. It's the same personality trait that allows him to stick to his principles in other matters. He does not make decisions based on expedience. He doesn't sell his soul to gain a vote. I think that he's a good quality human being and a good candidate. And if we as voters and as Americans can't see that, then we don't deserve him as a president.
Yeah, appreciate that, Fern. It's no time for principles. It's time for winning, Jamarl.
It's time for winning, man. It's time for, I mean, look, like I said, it's a bug. It's a feature. It's not a bug. It's just who he is.
Yeah,
it's
you're asking the guy to change. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing when people are like, oh, why don't you just start speaking to black voters in a more curious or vulnerable way?
Yeah.
Like, that's not
It's
that's
not
not
him. It's just not
happening
him. I
at
mean,
that moment. We
look, it's-
have another caller. Sorry, just
No, no,
Black
go for it.
Sheep Theory is his name on YouTube.
I love that name.
You might know him. Black Sheep Theory. Thank you for calling in. You want to talk a little bit about the primaries?
Hey, how's it going, brother Jamal? Good to see you.
What's going on, man?
I'm good, brother. Good. Yeah, I just want to say I think Bernie does have a serious problem with talking to the black community. And an example I'll give is with Obama. See, I first campaigned for Obama back in 2008, so I got into politics. And just 2 years later, my mom died, and I got arrested and sat in Harris County Jail, not prison. You don't go outside in jail for 2 years because I couldn't afford bail. So it is dire for some of us out here. You know, I have homies still on the block like it's 1980. You know what I'm saying? Like, even like people still smoke crack. Where, right? You know, and it's like, and it's dire out here. And he has to speak to like people like me. That's, you know, because there's classism even within our community. And you know, I think the Democrats are going to be, the black vote's going to get really splintered with generationally. I think after this, because everybody I see, and I know my age on whether it be Twitter, Facebook, anywhere, we're not having it with the Democrats. You know what I mean? I ain't nobody's saying black issues. Nobody's really trying to fight for us, man. So I think the Democrats may lose, whether it be Biden or Bernie, because they're not, you know, speaking to these issues. And Trump's at least playing fealty. He's playing, you know what I mean? He's pandering, you know, and it goes a long way. So I'm a little worried, if you want me to be honest with you, about the upcoming election. I don't think he's going to get very big black numbers, you know.
Yeah, appreciate the call. And that's the thing I appreciate about that caller's call is people like him and others, they don't have the luxury not to pay attention.
Right.
They don't get to just check out, you know. They live it. Their bodies are politicized. Their lives are politicized. They've been in the belly of the beast. These people don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And when you hear people like that making the claim, that's the type of people we need to listen to. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, is on
That's
MSNBC
so,
right
yeah.
now, the quote-unquote progressive. That's who the mainstream media puts out there. I appreciate you calling and being part of our political misfits family. That's one big part of our show is to give voices like that a platform they can call in and be heard. I greatly appreciate that. We have another caller on the line, 202-521-1320. If you, too, would like to be on the show, give us a call. Alex, you're on the air. You want to talk about the Democratic strategy.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I know I call a lot.
Call every day. We
Call
greatly
every day.
appreciate
You're
it.
perfectly fine.
I think at a national level, at least, I think there's kind of like just a disconnect here that Democrats essentially don't care about winning. I think at a certain level, they would rather have someone like Biden who's ideologically closer to Trump and can be more maintained over and above having someone who might actually try and push the party into like a direction where they actually have to like be good on their promises. And it's easier for them, I think, generally to just be out of power and be kind of this sort of pseudo-opposition resistance so they can just kind of wave their hands about kind of inconsequential issues and make big stinks about Russiagate and stuff. We're not really having to they're not even responsible for making progressive change because they can just claim, we're out of power, we don't have control over this. So just stay tight, but overall it's just kind of management.
Thank you for the call, Alex. How much do you think, Jamarl, the Democrats are even factoring in winning and losing? And how much are they factoring in just that Joe Biden's our guy, he's what fits us together, we're going to stay as a team, we don't want Sanders to rip it away from us? Winning and losing is beyond the kind of conversation. It's simply let's make sure our voice, our power maintains power.
Yeah, I think personally, I think the point of this was to stop Sanders.
Yeah.
I think Biden was secondary. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think it's because you can't. Nobody in their right mind can look at Joe Biden, one misspelled or horribly written or horribly said sentence after the next, barely able to keep it together, low energy, all that stuff. This guy, I mean, the fact that they have to hide the candidate, I mean, come on. Like, it becomes so over the top that you have to be like, so wait, all of you guys think that this guy is the best guy? Like, it's so out there. And between the two, him versus Trump, I just have a hard look. I understand that there are a lot of people, the same people who thought Gore was the best person, who thought Clinton was the best person, that thought John Kerry was the best person, that thought Trump was going to get perp walk for Russia. Like, I know people have these ideas in their heads, in their own bubbles of the world. You choose your friends, you choose the people who you associate with on Facebook and Twitter. What? Fair enough. But that's different than the perspective of the party, which cares about maintaining power. And you must understand that if Sanders wins, the party fundamentally changes between Joe Biden losing to Trump, which allows them to maintain their power base, as opposed to Sanders fundamentally altering the party for a generation. And look, don't just take my word for it. Chris Matthews. Chris Matthews said as much. He was like, hey, maybe this is what Democrats need to lose in order to make sure that you stop Sanders, because he's going to change it for a generation. Chris Matthews, on that very specific point, is right.
Yeah, 202-521-1320. If you want to join our show, give us a call. We have a few callers on the line. Nick, thank you for calling in. What's on your mind?
Hi, yeah. I just wanted to point out that I think this whole election process, much like 2016, has more been about a two-way battle where it's not just the people on the stage competing for the presidency, but also what is Bernie's major motive, which is pointing out the establishment versus the people. And I think at this point, a lot of people are kind of afraid of change, and they kind of tend to cling to the establishment because it's like their go-to for the past.
Yeah.
Who knows how long? So.
No, I totally hear you, Nick. Thank you for that call. I tell that story often. A few years ago, I was working on different initiatives here in Washington, D.C. to organize alternatives to policing, and we were able to build quite a bit of a coalition. We were able to bring together nonprofit, business, government, all sorts of different people, government officials, and we had several government officials working very closely with us. And then the second there was quite a few shootings in our neighborhood there in Columbia Heights, Washington, D.C., I had several of those elected officials say, Bob, this alternatives to policing sounds great. Let's continue to work on it. But I also think we should start calling for more foot police, more foot patrols. And you're saying to myself, well, you can't have both. Can't have more police and less police brutality. You can't have more police and alternatives to policing. And yet these people simply said, sorry, we just kind of feel safer if we go back to the thing that we feel comfortable with. And you're saying to these people, look, you just said you care about police brutality. You said you care about the homeless, the people that are being pushed out on the streets. You care about displacement. You care about the mentally ill. You care about people not being targeted, profiled. All of these different things you say you care about, and these people still go on and say they care about all these things. We had a politician here, an elected official, say, Bob, I want to continue to call out the bad principle and practices of stop and frisk, but at the same time, I need to continue to increase the police budget. How can I walk that tightrope? And you're saying you can't. And this is what Elizabeth Warren thought she could do. She could play the progressive policies while at the same time clamoring to the establishment, and you can't. And when we've seen people regress and pull away from the Sanders, kind of having to go out there and stuff you're not sure about, it sounds good. I think I want all those things. That sounds great. And all of a sudden, people got nervous because Trump said, you should be nervous right now. And people, as much as they were ready to fight Trump, they slowly kind of said, you know what? He took what he says is his. We should take what is ours as well. And let's go back to where we felt safe. And that's what I think people are seeing with Joe Biden. They go back to the guy because, hey, he's not going to do any of these good things that we've talked about, but at least I feel safe. Yeah. Even though I can tell you at the same time this stuff isn't going to make us safer. It's wild times. JR, maybe JR can make some sense of it. JR, thank you for calling in to Political Misfits. Make sense of the moment for it, JR. I know it's a big question for you and whatever else you have to share with us.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the call. I just wanted to say, I think you're right. I think people are voting for Biden just simply because they feel like he is safe. But if you look at, the coronavirus, I think your caller You had a caller yesterday who did a phenomenal job talking about the coronavirus and, the difference here and how we were able to rally the troops versus how they were able to in China and how they saw, massive results in what they were able to do. And this is the time for Bernie to come out and just tell people, like, when you have situations like this, what they didn't talk about whenever they were on Capitol Hill and the CDC were saying, well, we weren't able to move as swiftly as we wanted to. Well, it's because our systems are private. You need permission here versus over there in China, you don't need permission. But I think, when you think about Biden, I think one of the things that comes to my mind is in the general election, I definitely see a situation. Let's say if Biden does win, I can definitely see a situation where Biden doesn't even go to the debates and he just sits them out because he knows that he can't win a general election if he's out there against Trump toe to toe. And I would love to see Bernie come out over the next couple of weeks, talk about how his policies benefit Black people, how his student loan forgiveness plan will reduce the white-black wealth gap from 12 to 1 to 5 to 1, and really talk about, legalizing marijuana and expunging the records of African Americans in prison. Because right now there's over 1 million Black men in prison right now, and I think he needs to get that home.
Yeah, not according to the media. It's like, yeah, he's been saying all of these issues on the stump. On the stump, I saw him in Iowa talking about legalizing marijuana, but that's nowhere to be found. Let's take a quick break here on Political Misfits. Give us a chance to catch our breath. Radio Sputnik live in Washington, D.C. We're back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today? Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Welcome back to Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture. You hear that sound, so this is our politics and art segment, or art and politics segment, depending on the way you want to talk about it. Give us a call at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. You can discuss what we've been talking about, which is Mini Super Tuesday, or whatever else is on your mind. So one of the most interesting things, we like to say that art or politics is theater, and a bit of theater that has been taking place is this, what do you want to call it? This running around on her press.
I almost started booing before I could even get
before
words
you even get it out, right?
Boo.
Her press briefing, her going on the Saturday SNL, as if there wasn't a primary that was going on.
You're talking about Elizabeth Warren here.
Talking about Elizabeth Warren with big issues that she supposedly cared about. I mean, after all, she was pushing for Medicare for all. She kept telling you that she was blue in the face, that she was for Medicare for all, that climate is a big existential issue, that we need to do something about climate. So she had this huge climate bill, criminal justice, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, one issue after the next that Sanders was pushing. Warren had a cuter version of that particular plan in order to make the capitalist class feel a little bit at ease. Well, it didn't work. But nevertheless, you would think that if she gets out of the race and if she does still believe in these issues that she was pushing for in the campaign, then the one person who definitely believes in those issues also, authentically so, is Sanders. So there's been a lot of lefties who've been shocked and weirded out that Elizabeth Warren hasn't necessarily backed Sanders. Now, not this lefty, because this lefty for over a year has been making the point that Warren, just like she told you in 2016, was a creature of politics, not ideology. And in the same way she went towards Clinton with the idea that she was going to get political concessions for going towards Clinton, I don't know why people expected 2020 to be that dramatically different. There's been some reporting from the Hill on the reason that Warren is not endorsing. Let's take a listen to this clip.
Oh yeah, I've talked to a few people, and of course they're talking. They're asking to be anonymous to speak more freely, and they say this: she's not happy with Bernie Sanders. Why? He kind of stuck it to her, didn't he? Where did he go just before Super Tuesday? He went to Massachusetts, her home state. He campaigned in Boston. He campaigned in Springfield. He kind of almost seemed like he was poking at her, and his allies, some of his top surrogates, think the squad especially was saying some really difficult and tough things about Elizabeth Warren, saying it was basically time for her to get the heck out of the race. That really hurt her, I think, from at least what her campaign aides were telling me. And I think that was also a reason why she's in no rush to endorse a guy who used to be considered one of her closest friends.
Now, this gentleman's name is Paul Steinhauser, and, you know, that's an amazing clip. They're like, because basically he's like, yeah, I've been talking to people within the campaign, and they didn't particularly like the squad and some of the things that they said about Elizabeth Warren. And Bernie Sanders ran in Massachusetts.
This table is, just so you know, it's nailed to the floor. I
can't rip it. Yeah, I was like,
did Elizabeth Warren not campaign in Vermont?
I don't know.
I have no idea. What are you talking about?
It's just such a weird and bizarre thing. I mean, if roles were reversed, Sanders would have endorsed her the moment that he got out that race. And everybody knows it. I mean, the guy went from pillar to post backing Hillary, and that was after they cheated the guy. And he's still getting booed from place to place to place. And Hillary Clinton, professional bitter person, comes out attacking him vitriolic at every opportunity, and he still went to bat for her. And Warren, who he never attacked, who he never would go after, who to the chagrin of all of his supporters would not create contrast, she attacked him relentlessly. And now decides her feelings are hurt. And so the big issues that she cared about, she doesn't want to back. I don't believe that her feelings are hurt. I think that's kind
of what I'm going to. I don't buy the fact that like she's upset at Sanders supporters, and that's what's like.
Yeah, I don't buy that.
So what is it then? It's just she wants the Democratic Party to stay intact. She just wants to reform it, which means keeping everybody where they are. Let's just tweak it. Let's bring in some lefties. Let's train them. Let's run them for office, and let's kind of slowly improve by mixing together.
I think she's a creature of the party.
Yeah.
And I think from just like in 2016 where the party kind of came together and said, not him,
yeah.
I think she was working in tandem with that. I think it's really that straightforward. I don't think it's like, I think people are looking at this through an ideological lens. Like, well, Warren, she wants to go after bankers and she's a lefty, and so it's shocking. But I don't think that's the way it's being viewed. I think it really does boil down to who do I think is going to win, and what do I think I can get out of this within the context of who I think is going to win.
Yeah.
And this isn't an ideological choice. This is a choice where I could get political concessions from Joe Biden by backing Biden if Biden wins. That type of stuff.
It is really interesting looking at her political arc. I talked a lot about how I'm somebody at a young age, was Republican, 18 years old, followed in my parents' footsteps, wasn't very politically conscious, and how I moved across the spectrum as just kind of an individual who wanted to engage more and more with politics. And I found myself going through the Republican Party, through the Democratic Party, and then realizing, the Democratic Party, and kind of shifted through it, where Elizabeth Warren, who is a well-publicized former Republican, well into her political consciousness in her adult years, in her 40s, it wasn't just my youthful indiscretions that I'm going to blame it for right now. Oh, it's so embarrassing still to even talk about. But her move basically, I don't know if she moved as much as just the Republican Party maybe moved to her right, and then she found the Democratic Party, which also kind of shifted to the right, and she kind of landed there. That it wasn't necessarily about her seeking out truth, seeking out justice, seeking out helping vulnerable people, but instead the political process and spectrum just shifted in a way that she found herself being a Democrat. It wasn't some ideological change, but the Democratic Party just was able to pick up the Elizabeth Warren Republicans of the world and adapt them. And so then to think that she's going to be part of this process that wasn't her necessarily moving, but the party's moving, that she would somehow be the voice of the left ideologically, but that's not the reason I think she necessarily moved across the spectrum to where she was. And I think I was on a different thinking than you were, where you were right about where Elizabeth Warren's intentions lie or where she was coming ideologically. But yeah, I think I was wrong in that her movement was much different. We have quite a few callers stacked up here. I do want to get to these calls and give the latest on the coronavirus. The National Guard has been deployed to New Rochelle there in the state of New York to help with the coronavirus response. I can tell you other scary stories here from Washington, D.C., a city wholly unprepared to deal with the crisis as several Congress members have self-quarantined. Seems like Donald Trump may have to self-quarantine at some time. I saw Matt Gaetz, the Florida Congress member and a favorite of Donald Trump, having to self-quarantine. He rode in the beast there with Donald Trump, but luckily Donald Trump is one of the healthiest humans that has ever been on the planet, so I'm sure he's fine and will be fine. Do you remember that
Healthiest
video of
man alive.
what was the eclipse when Trump looked up at the eclipse without the glasses on and stuff? This guy just like doesn't believe in like science or that he's actually affected by like basic things that most humans are. Oh, what a mess here, Jamar. Let's get to a few calls here. DJ, thank you for your patience and thank you for calling into Political Misfits. What's on your mind?
Oh, well, I know you wanted to get to the coronavirus. I was just still talking about or thinking about the votes.
Yeah, talk about it.
I have serious questions about the legitimacy of that vote count. It seems like there was a heavy media emphasis on the coalescing of the candidates to Joe Biden. And I feel like that was done so that they could kind of justify fudging the numbers because the entrance and exit numbers are dissimilar to the actual votes. So I don't know. I just think that after the narrative by saying these candidates whose numbers didn't even mathematically add up to something that would compete with Sanders, and that's just one point. Another point is some of those candidates had voters that supposedly, according to the polls, would have favored Sanders. So on several points, they all just didn't work out in his favor. It just seems like they're creating narratives so they can justify cheating, and that was it.
Thank you for your call. Lots of questions to be parsed and examined, Jamarl. I mean, it's hard to keep up with it with each state one after the other, but we do know that in several states there, they had missed different counts and votes. The one, I think it was in California, where the lady, or is it Texas, where she had all the flash drives, like the thumb drives with different votes on it.
Oh,
and so
wow.
people are just like, what in the world is going on in these places? And obviously the exit polls, which aren't perfect science, have also showed discrepancies. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that and give you the latest news as it develops. John, thank you for calling in. You had some comments here around Bernard Sanders.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I agree with the last caller about this. So I just think the left itself has a problem with messaging, like framing their messaging. Like I keep hearing people saying the establishment. I think if you would like call it what it is, corruption. Like you would paint Joe Biden, a vote for Joe Biden, as you're voting for corruption. That tends to go well more so than, the establishment. But like people get confused with that type of framing.
I agree with you, but why don't you think Sanders does that? I mean, because look, if your argument is, and I don't mean you, I'm just saying, if your framing of the world is, we have an existential crisis, everything from healthcare, everything to education, everything from making sure people get their wages. Like the moment that you frame the world in those terms, then everything else is allowed to some degree. Not everything, but you know what I mean. Like the saying that, corruption is the case should be okay, provided that the world is at stake. Do you understand? So what's Sanders' issue with this? Is this really just an ideological thing where, for whatever reason, he really does think Joe Biden is his friend, despite the fact that Joe Biden is the avatar for all of that corruption? And by the way, same thing with Warren. If you remember, one of Warren's, she cut her teeth on this notion of the bankruptcy bill with Joe Biden, which makes it all the more weirder that she didn't necessarily back Sanders against somebody who she considered to be corrupt, that being Joe Biden. So what do you think? Do you think it's just entirely an ideological thing, or is it some of the reason why he doesn't call corruption corruption?
I think he has the same problem with everybody else on the left. They try to appeal to the intellect, not the emotion. I think if he would focus more on the emotions of people. Like I keep seeing people saying, like, I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand why people keep voting for Biden, and you keep getting emotional answers like you get for the black vote. Well, he was with Obama. That has nothing to do with intellect. That has to do with a feeling. Yeah. I don't think he attacks that, accurately. So that's I wouldn't add.
Thank you for the call there. It's in Dallas County that I was referring to. It was asked to recount Super Tuesday election results after 44 thumb drives were discovered. Basically, the person running the elections there, the administrator, Tony Pippins-Poole, said that it was 44 thumb drives she didn't turn in. It was unclear whether or not that represented 44 individuals' voting centers, but clearly it said 16 were not received in a timely manner to the elections department, and 28 were from voting machines not scheduled to be used on that day. American democracy. You don't need the Russians when you have Americans working the ballot boxes.
That's mind-blowing.
Pretty crazy. Scotty, thank you for calling in. You're on Political Misfits. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I want to say, there's this whole idea that part of the reason why black folks aren't necessarily turn out for Sanders because he doesn't have a black agenda. And I kind of take issue with that because if we really cared about, whether or not a politician had a black agenda, people like Elizabeth Warren or Tom Steyer or even Marianne Williamson, which basically ran for with the whole idea of reparations being part of her top platform. I mean, you had people thinking about racial justice better than Bernie, and yet, he still came in second. And I also want to think, part of it is deep down inside, a lot of us know that Barack Obama was a failure, right? Problem is we can't really come to terms with that, and also we can't really come to terms with what the Democratic Party is and isn't. Like how they've used minority communities and tokenism to sort of assuage us, and they've used symbolism to hide the fact of their terrible right-wing economic policy. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, is there certain things that Sanders could have done better?
So,
Scotty, thank you. Yeah, no, great points all around, Scotty. Thank you for the call.
Absolutely. And I think some of it is just messaging. I don't think it's policy. If you're talking about policy that deals with the material difference or the material conditions of a particular class, it's Sanders. I mean,
let me briefly. We were talking off the air before this about the Democratic Socialist of America, who ideologically I'm completely, mostly in agreement with. I haven't been into the weeds of their policies and stuff, but from a surface level, from being friends with a lot of DSA members, we're right on pace with each other. I do grassroots organizing, arts, culture. I'm pretty embedded within a lot of communities here in Washington, D.C. myself, and a lot of these grassroots meetings, you don't see those DSA members. There is kind of we know the policies and ideologies, and we're working on it. We're writing white papers, and we're in our own communities, and we're on Twitter, and we're aggressively talking about these issues. And you need that type of energy because you do need to have media. You do need well-researched policies. You do need somebody kind of pushing from behind and calling out stuff. The research, the opposition checks, all of that stuff's really important. But there is some type of mismatch that's happened, though, with DSA members not feeling either comfortable, not being kind of pulled into or kind of reached out to, whatever you want to say it is, to the actual grassroots organizing spaces themselves. And I don't know if it's just a lack of comfortability or what it is exactly. And I kind of think that's the same thing Bernie Sanders has faced. I don't know if it's necessarily him or just kind of the people around him. There is some type of level of discomfort or
disconnect.
And it's this idea to be really authentic, and maybe it would be not authentic. Inauthentic, excuse me, to actually then kind of go into those spaces. Or this isn't really my space. I don't speak to this. I can relate to it. I mean, Jewish people like Bernie Sanders can relate to oppression better than anyone else. But that the black experience is not necessarily the direct experience, but they get it and they support it, and we're going to fight for it. But they may not necessarily feel comfortable then going to that space. And there is kind of the segregated state that we're in that I think has led to a lot of that disconnect, that Bernie Sanders trying to be a senator, trying to run for president, he alone's not going to bridge that. That's up to a lot of us at the local community level. But I don't know who starts that process. Is it kind of the grassroots people inviting the DSA people going into those spaces? I think that really needs to be discussed regardless of what happens here in the election. If Sanders wins, I think it will be naturally forced and pushed. But if that doesn't happen and you care about the movement that Sanders has started, then try to help bridge those gaps so it doesn't happen the next time around.
What's next is a
big question. We have Casey. That's what's next, at least here for Political Misfits. Casey, thank you for calling in.
Hey, man, what's going on?
Not much. How you feeling today?
I'm a little bit distraught. I'm worried about tonight and everything. I'm worried about Like you said, the thumb drive. I'm irritated at Warren. I feel like she's nothing but a serial opportunist. I feel like she hopped on being, a lot of people, like, she could have justifiably mistaken herself to be Native American. I think back in the day, if you look at pictures of her, she dyed her hair jet black, man. You know what I'm saying?
Fair enough. Fair enough. So what's the topic? Is it just, the general disappointment of potentially today, or the concern that's going into mini Super Tuesday?
I think Warren has a moral compass, but she does not have the spine to follow it, because she's got this little voice in the back of her head that says, well, what about me? What about me? What do I get out of it? What about me?
Thank you. I appreciate the call, man. And look, you might actually be right. I mean, when you think back to the Medicare for All question, the reporting on the Medicare for All stuff may boil down to she didn't know that she would have to go into the policies. She thought she'd just be able to say, I'm with Bernie, I'm with Bernie, I'm with Bernie. So there might have been, this inkling towards that. But of course, the issue became, do you want to raise taxes in order to pay for it? In which case she gets really dodgy with that, because every other Democrat, when you ask them about raising taxes, they get skittish about the tax stuff. So I don't entirely know. I mean, it seems like she's legit on the Wall Street stuff, meaning she does want to, if she could punch a banker in the throat and get away with it, I think she probably would. But beyond that point, it is unclear to me on what Warren is. I mean, if I'm being honest. We have a few comments. Dudas Priest, I'll concede mini Super Tuesday if you call next week's election Super Special Tuesday. Just kidding. Keep great work. Love the show. Thank you very much. And Nana, I want to know what you think about the search result manipulation. I've read compelling studies that the internet search can influence the vote by 12%. Oh, wow. And how woefully inept our politicians are on this issue. Now, I haven't read any information.
I don't know if it's that high. You can check out, people want to know more, we've had Robert Epstein, professor there on our shows here on Radio Sputnik quite a bit, showing that algorithms we're basically favoring Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you search stuff, and the great example, one of them is like, or if you start like Israel, and it gives you kind of finishes your search results, versus if you search like Palestinian. And so you can see the way in which the search results finish themselves to favor kind of one story of like who's on the right side and then who is on the wrong side of things. And I think he was able to show a 2 or 3% bump for Hillary Clinton because of those algorithms. Yeah. And now you see on the other thing, I'm telling people, keep an eye on Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg, good old buddies with Peter Thiel, bringing Peter Thiel into the White House, being kind of the liaison. And if you have the Warrens of the world, the Bidens of the world, the Democratic Party saying we're going to break up Facebook, Facebook's too big, Joe Biden's not going to do anything to Facebook. If you're a big Facebook fan out there, don't worry. But if all of a sudden you think Mark Zuckerberg saying, well, who's going to help me best? Trump has had kid gloves towards the guy. Nothing has been happening to Facebook these last few years. And if he says, who's best for me, what's going to stop them to write algorithms in a certain way that favor one candidate or another? And as you know, Jamarl, some of the stuff can be explicit, but some of the stuff is implicit in just how you think about who you want to appeal to and reach out to. If you're saying on Facebook, we want to appeal to those who get the most riled up and most angry and that start fighting people, that's our business model. That's going to favor certain types of people engaging on your platform. And you're going to write your algorithms in a certain way. And everybody knows that Facebook doesn't promote love, because people don't come back in constantly to love other people. They promote hate. People will come all day and fight people on the internet. That's the business model of Facebook. And so Facebook's saying, how do we protect ourselves as well as make another $1 or $2? That's going to rile up the current political moment. So Elizabeth Warren, to maybe bring it full circle, be upset at Jack or be upset at Mark Zuckerberg for the platforms they've created that allow toxicity to run rampant on social media. Don't blame the players that are then on these platforms of the Bernie Sanders of the world, and have a little ideological backbone at this moment. I'm upset here. Mini Tuesday's got me riled up. I'm sure it's going to be another full show of frustration. Maybe I'll vent my anger on Facebook. That seems like a safe place to do it, Jamarl.
So mine is Twitter, right? That's why I vent my rage and frustration. Yeah. This day has been a hard. Look, I think we were talking about it earlier. A double Virgo with an Aries moon is a hard dog to keep on the porch. and it's because of stuff like this, right?
Yeah, it's a frustrating day. But don't worry. We'll be back tomorrow, and we'll share either the joyous comeback or what Bernie Sanders does next after the defeats. Right. Big thank you to Ruth Buffalo, Julie Hurwitz there in North Dakota and Michigan. And thank you to all of our callers. You're listening to Political Misfits. Now get back to organizing.